Okay, we are live for this week's Casual Conversations in Cybersecurity, and we're really excited to have Covey with us, who is a journalist, communications consultant, and podcast host of Crucial Tech, among other many interesting and varied roles. Lou, thank you so much for joining us. I know you woke up early. Would you please just share a little more about yourself and your
Okay. Well, the short story is that I'm a professional communicator. I've been started out as a journalist when I was 18 years old, and I've been doing something in the form of communication ever since then. I have recently, in the past couple of years, returned to the journalism role, looking most specifically at renewable energy and cybersecurity, which I found are actually quite tied into each other nowadays. And
yes.
I don't claim the title of being an expert because I'm not good at anything, but I've learned a lot about everything. When people ask me, what do I cover? What have I covered in my life? I said, it might be easier to ask me what I haven't covered. Because I've even done women's shoes, you know?
So how did you come from women's shoes all the way into, renewable tech?
Women's shoes kind of got shoehorned in during a real bad time. It was
for women's shoes.
It was about like 15 years into my career when the economy had one of its breakdowns. That's the nice thing about being as old as I am. I've seen several economic meltdowns, and they're all just as bad as each other. So.
I'm questioning which one it is. I'm trying to. I don't want to age you. I don't want to go too far back.
It's the Reagan collapse.
Okay, I didn't want to go that far back.
I do.
If I say that, if I bring the 80s up. Okay.
But cybersecurity has become really interesting to me. Probably because from my generalist position, it affects everybody. When I was doing semiconductors and communications platforms, that's a very small market. You don't really have to explain stuff to a layman. Nobody cares what kind of chip they got in their phone. They just want to know why it's not working. Right. But everyone knows someone or has been affected themselves, has been affected by a cybercrime in some way. It is a very general thing, and people don't know what to do about it. No matter how many times you tell them, if you do this, this, and this, you're going to be safe, because people are basically lazy and they don't understand why you have to do that. They're basically trusting, and that's where cyber criminals have the opportunity to cause problems. So
they take advantage for sure.
I have the theory, even though you said that everyone's been affected or know someone who's been affected, I compare it to Corona. Those people who get a really light case and they're like, yeah, that was no big deal, right?
Yeah.
I've been a Capital One customer. I've been affected, but I wasn't really affected. Nothing happened. Nothing happened to me. So I think even though it did affect me, right, it's easy to be numb to that.
Yeah.
And that's how do you explain that to people who, like, it's happened to them and nothing bad happened? Yeah. That's a special message, for your audience.
And it's a bad message. I mean, I had my bank account drained by a guy who set up a home brewery operation in England.
Wow.
Nice.
And I use a local credit union for my bank.
Right.
And their security is pretty good, but somehow he got a hold of this stuff, which made me, I'm pretty locked down as it is, but that made me locked down anymore. But as you said, I didn't lose any money. It was
insured.
It was all brought in, but.
Oh, that's good. So they didn't end up finalizing the transaction.
Oh yeah. They bought it. Yeah. Cause I contacted the company and said, that wasn't me.
Okay.
Wow.
Yeah. Some people aren't, depending on the nature of the fraud, some people are not lucky enough to get, the funds. The funds are in the Caymans,
The thing is too, that when somebody who doesn't know what's going on gets affected, they panic. They don't know what to do. They think this is going to be what's going to go on for the rest of their lives, but they can't fix it. And my whole thing, I have the podcast Crucial Tech, but I started writing about cybersecurity with EE Web under another publication, and then we launched Cyber Protection Magazine in January. Patrick Bosch and I, and the goal of the magazine is not to be a place for necessarily experts, but for people who don't understand cybersecurity and to put it into language they understand. And at first I thought we were just talking about common people, you know, moms and dads and grandpas and grandmas. But I went to a conference a couple of years ago about security in the supply chain. And the guy who was talking was a guy who I knew well from the semiconductor industry. And my thought was, what does this guy know about security? Because he really didn't. But he had been hired as a research professor at a university under a government program to look into supply chain security. And when I interviewed him afterwards, he said, yeah, I had no idea what I was getting into. It sounded like a good gig. But as he was talking about what he had discovered in his first year, he was showing all of these holes along the semiconductor supply chain where there was a massive security hole. And to me, since I've been doing it for about a year, I said, well, yeah, this is not a big deal. Why is this a keynote? But I looked around the audience of about 1,000, 1,500 engineers, and they are scribbling furiously. And like, they're actually taking this down. And every once in a while I'd hear a, holy shit, hope I can say that. but they were stunned by what this guy was saying. And I suddenly realized here are these semiconductor engineering professionals, people who have had experience in this thing, and they don't know about it.
Right.
And that's where I suddenly realized the audience for cybersecurity is huge, but it's practically all laymen. And even when you come across people who are, been in cybersecurity for a while, they really haven't been in technology very long, and they understand how to talk to each other. They don't understand how to talk to the rest of the world that really needs what they're doing.
I think that's a really great point you're bringing up, and I actually was pondering this a bit myself about, I see a lot on LinkedIn with the cybersecurity professionals I follow and the conversations they're having, and how they're saying their messages and they're saying, yeah, we need to help our users do this. We need to encourage the users, educate them. And it's kind of like rah rah rah. But then like finally you saw they got it. It was like, wait, but we're talking to each other. And I said, and the people they need to be targeting their messages to are the CEOs and the regular finance department people and the regular engineers, that are just in the groundwork doing. They need that educational content and information, even if they're not going to be buying the bigger product, but to have that understanding and awareness.
That creates another problem too, in that the marketing 101 is to go for the biggest customer you can get. And that's all well and good because that's where the money is. If you go to Oracle with a cybersecurity product, they will buy it without even testing it, because they buy every cybersecurity product because they don't want to be left out in the cold, and they have the money to do it. But they don't need it. I mean, they've got every cybersecurity product there is, but the local guy who is trying to survive during the pandemic by selling online, where he's never done that before, he's the guy that really needs the help, but he can't afford. He doesn't have the budget that Oracle does, and as a result, the cybersecurity companies that are making these products and services ignore them, because what they're trying to do is impress their boards and get investment. And I understand all
investors,
but the market is so big, and the criminals are looking for the lowest hanging fruit. They're looking for the most
right.
They're not looking to target Oracle because they know they're locked down.
It's too hard. Yeah.
they're looking to target the local grocery store or a
get
hospital.
like a thousand small ones. Yeah.
And that's where the problem is. And I don't know if I should name names.
I love name and shame, but
okay, well, there's a really good company that I've talked to a couple of times. It's a company called Air Gap Networks, and they're making a really interesting product that's very inexpensive. And what it does, it uses AI to identify the typical ransomware code, because there's only like about 5 or 6 different types of ransomware, and they're sold through syndicates to there are other criminals who really don't have any computer backgrounds. I mean, they could be living in a hut in Nigeria, okay, and they can buy this stuff for $50 and just promise to give 50% of their proceeds back to the syndicate. And the syndicates take all of the risk. If something comes down, they're going to go after the syndicate, not to go after the guys that actually did the attack. And so it's all upside for them, no really very little downside. And so they're looking for the easiest places to go. They don't want to put the effort or expense into hacking a major organization that has some understanding of cybersecurity. They're going to go after a colonial pipeline that says, why would anyone want to hack us? They're going to go after the water treatment plant in Florida. This is why would anyone want to hack us? And that's kind of the attitude. Why would anyone? I'm nobody. Why would you want to hack me? Well, because that's your attitude, and you're not locked down.
Right.
But what AirGap does is it reads all these codes, identifies them, and then puts them into a sandbox, and will isolate the device or devices that have been infected. So it isolates them from the rest of the network, so you can just deal with those devices and continue to do business. Now, that's a great tool.
Yeah.
But AirGap is going after the big guys. And I've given them crap every time I've talked to them about it. I says, look, that's great. I'm glad you're making money at this, but you've got a product that could save the world right now. I have this thing I'm doing. I'm calling it an ongoing thing. My search for the Holy Grail in cybersecurity, and they might have it. There are lots of companies that have a good idea. On the other side, you have a company like Ronin Pen Test, which is out of the UK, and they do penetration testing. But they also have a tool that will automatically scan your network to see what the vulnerabilities are. They're white hat hackers. But unlike most white hat hackers, they don't go in without permission. You have to hire them.
Okay.
And their prices are dirt cheap. A guy running a liquor store can afford this stuff.
Oh, wow.
Okay. And you can just do it once or twice a year, and you're pretty much taken care of. You can find where your holes are. And that's a good start for cybersecurity. And that's what companies need to do. The 90% of all the attacks are occurring in small companies. That's the problem.
And it's the glamour's in the enterprise, but the fact is the bulk of the customers are not enterprise. If you have a lower price point, but more people can afford you, you're still going to make money.
I mean, that's what the cybercrime criminals method is, go after those guys, and they find enough. It's working for them.
But even at that point, the little guys that they're being ignored, they are the major point of penetration for the big guys.
Right.
Okay. That's what happened.
We're all interconnected.
That's what they were talking about at Black Hat. A couple of the speakers were talking about how what you do is you move up the supply chain to the smaller suppliers. You infect them, and your goal is not to take them down, but to eventually get into Kaseya or Colonial or SolarWinds. And once they get in there, then they can raise all kinds of havoc. And every company that I've talked to doesn't have a solution for that. For solving the problem once you get one of your small vendors behind your firewall, you can't protect yourself after that.
Right.
And that's a problem. So if you really want to solve the problem, you've got to expand your market.
Right.
Yeah.
And how do we convince people, or not people, the companies and the people behind the companies, to do more of that? There's a lot of money. It's, people talk about, cybersecurity is growing, at this rate, and in 2025 it's worth this much. But like, it's worth that much because bad things are happening.
Yeah.
So how do we get you on the good? Not that most of these companies are, I believe, trying to do good, but
Right.
Well,
how do we get them to be really, really a global team player?
It's the same problem with every technology company. I did a study, and it's been backed up by some other places, like Columbia University did a similar study, where they found that companies that this is your area. This is where people should be investing money. Companies who invest at least 10% of their revenues into marketing invariably succeed. You don't have to do more than that, but 10% is kind of like the bellwether for success. When you start going below that, you start seeing companies fail. When you go below 5%, you have absolute failure. Now, in the technology world, that's different. The biggest companies, like even Microsoft invests 5% of its revenues in marketing. And they're doing okay. But most technology companies I've seen that failed have dropped below 2%. And there are a lot of companies that do that. And frankly, I don't see that big of an investment in marketing by any cybersecurity company. And that's why they don't get out there. And they're looking for the low-hanging fruit, which means the people that can pay, write the big checks. But going back to Ronin Pen Test, they're only focused on little guys. I mean, they don't go after the big guys because the big guys have already gotten, big companies doing the pen test,
clamoring for their business, and
their business, since they launched last year, has grown an order of magnitude because they're focusing on education and they're focusing on small business.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
It works,
right?
And that's the big fear of marketers, is that if they don't make the big hit, that they're going to lose their budget. And it's true, they do. My joke has always been the marketing staff goes just before the janitorial staff when a company is downsized.
Yeah. We saw it in the pandemic. When the big swoosh came in, initially we, as an agency, we saw, marketers, cutting their budgets, left and right. And it was, it was one of the first things to go. And
that was one of the impetus for me going back into journalism, is because my public relations agency went bankrupt. Because in 1 week, the investors in 9 out of 10 of my clients decided to pull their money.
Wow.
And my business just disappeared.
Wow.
And so I said, well, back to the freelance work, and it just actually it made more money at the on a personal level.
Great.
But I've also read an article in Business Week or Bloomberg, I can't remember which one it was, but apparently the pandemic has actually shown companies that they need public relations more than they ever needed it before, because they don't have the trade shows to go and glad hand customers.
It wasn't about cutting the budgets. It was about adapting. That's what really needed to take place. And especially even in cybersecurity, because the pandemic brought around every company has their how to handle the work from home during the pandemic blog post, securely. And that was an opportunity that should have been seen early on. This isn't the time to scale back. This is the time to these are going to be the concerns. But maybe that's where the marketing is so out of the loop from a technological perspective that they didn't see that opportunity. I don't know, but there seems like there was a disconnect. If they're abandoning marketing budgets, at a time when they're needed more than ever.
Mm-hmm.
And two people who needed to talk weren't talking, you know?
Well, the marketing budgets that I've seen in technology, I would say 70 to 90% of the budget was put toward trade shows. Yeah, because, you know, essentially you go to a trade show, you meet a lot of people, and you buy a mailing list. Okay.
Right.
And that's how marketing was done. And everybody was doing it. And if you didn't show up at a trade show, then the common statement was, well, if we don't go, people will wonder what's wrong with us. Well, once the trade shows went away, hey, you know, we don't have any choice. And that's where
they need to be agile, though, and critical, because frankly, we all had to transform overnight. Yeah. The whole world. I literally, still in my mind, March 17th is the day the world ended for me. That's the day, like, my entire life changed. I went from career woman to stay-at-home mom because of a pandemic, right? Like, and I did that overnight, right? Yeah. And if you're in marketing, or in any industry, and if something huge happens, you have to look at the problem and then identify opportunities.
Yeah.
If you want to succeed, that's all you can do. And so I think it's like, okay, the trade shows went away. Now what? I don't think there should have been like months of figuring out now what. I think that's a conversation that just can happen, and you just say, how are we going to make the best of this?
Now the question is, you actually asked, how do we change this? And I think I have an answer.
All right.
The marketers in the cybersecurity industry can save the world.
Please go.
It's no longer about just making money for your company.
Right.
Because the world needs to understand this stuff.
Yes.
And they're not understanding it. They're overwhelmed by content that they don't understand. And if those companies can't figure out how to explain it to the broader public so that the public is pushing their big customers to buy their products,
right,
then we're all going to fail. The marketing now has a mission beyond being a cost center. This is how we get the word out. And some CEOs, they're getting that, but most of them, you know, they're still stuck on the ego gratification of marketing. You know?
Right.
You know, if we go back to the beginning of the internet, you know, when websites were popping up and people were saying, oh my God, look at all these places we can have content now. And that ended up becoming a boon for media, because you know, magazines were popping up everywhere.
Right.
And getting in loads of advertising money because it was going that way. But then companies decided, well, all I got to do is write a press release, and this magazine will publish the press release, because they don't have enough reporters to continue to look into us, to interview us, but we can just say whatever we want. So they didn't need public relations. They didn't need advertising. They didn't need marketing. They rode on the coattails of large corporations that were buying the advertising and getting themselves published. And so the whole idea of press releases became the issue. And I was actually sitting this was back in 1990. No, it was 1999. I was sitting in a roundtable conference that I'd set up with a particular editor, with the CEOs of the three biggest companies in the electronic design automation industry. And one of them said, we're tired of these smaller startups riding on our marketing coattails and getting coverage in the magazines, because our advertising spend has expanded your magazine so much. So we're going to cut back on our advertising spend to reduce the size of the magazines so these startups can't take advantage of it.
That's interesting.
And at which point, since most of my business was with startups, I started going back to my clients and saying, this is a problem. You guys really need to start advertising. This stuff about free media is going to go away. Nobody believed me. This was in 1999. By 2005, 90% of the journalism staff was laid off, and 70% of all the magazines were gone. And that's because that's what big companies decided to do. They withdrew their advertising, and the magazines disappeared, and journalism fell apart. You know, it wasn't Facebook that did it. Facebook was on the back end of it. Okay. Yeah. And the reason Facebook succeeded is because suddenly marketing wasn't succeeding anymore, and they couldn't understand why. And that's because they killed it.
Wow.
Yeah, so it's time. We've come full circle. It's time to start putting money into marketing, not just to sell stuff and not just to make the CEO happy that his name showed up in a press release that got published in EE Times. Okay. It's time to actually get something done. And that's the hardest. I mean, that's why I appreciate what you guys are doing. You're doing something different. But still within the realm of what people understand. So, you know, it's a valuable service, what you guys are doing, and it gets conversations going. I mean, that's one of my favorite things to say is the market is a conversation. You can ignore it or you can participate in it. Okay. And if you ignore it, you've got a problem. It's a conversation.
So going back to kind of, you know, how to fix it. And, you know, marketers have this in cybersecurity, have this opportunity to be superheroes and wear their virtual cape. Do you have some recommendations, you know, because we were talking a little bit about, you know, we have the no yucky marketing philosophy, you know, and we have a lot of thoughts about that. But, you know, you've been in the business so long. What would be your recommendation specifically to cybersecurity marketers when it comes to messaging and content? I hate that word, by the way, content. But it just, to me, it implies mass production. But still, it can be an important way to convey a message. Like, what would be your best advice for cybersecurity marketers in their hero moment?
The best way to reach the largest market is to reach the influencers. Okay. I ran a political blog for a while in Redwood City, where I only concentrated where I live in Redwood City, California, where I only concentrated on Redwood City issues. And I had at the peak 23 people in my audience. Okay. But those 23 people happened to be 3 members of city council, 2 members of the board of supervisors, and the rest were CEOs of development companies.
Right.
And as a result, they came to me and asked for my opinion about what they should do to fix a certain problem. So I became the influencer without trying to get a large audience. You don't need a large audience. You just need people who have connections. Okay?
Exactly.
So buying an ad in a publication is a good thing. Okay, because at least you're supporting a free press. Benjamin Franklin, I'm paraphrasing here, he said, a democracy requires a free press, and a free press is good for business. Therefore, business should support a free press. He was the one who started the first publication in the world that was entirely supported by advertising back in 1775, 1770. So that's the point. You've got to have a free press, and you've got to reach people who are influential within the community you want to reach. And that means you don't need to go to a big publication. You need to go to things like Cyfluencer or Cyber Protection Magazine or even Cyber Ventures, which Cyber Ventures I have a little hard time with because they're investing in cybersecurity companies, and they also have a magazine. So
that's a bit of a conflict.
Yeah, but the fact of the matter is I know the people are involved, and they have integrity, and so yeah, a lot of it has to be the image you project, and yeah, I'm a Cyber Protection Magazine is a partnership. We share revenues, and so you know, we do want to get that in, but we also stayed up front that we don't believe in advertising. If you really want to buy a banner ad, well, okay, we'll give it to you, but we're telling you right now, it doesn't work. Okay. But we know what makes your CEOs happy. And if and if you want us to print your press release, well, we'll gladly do it, but you'll have to pay us to do it. Okay. Because what we do, we create real content. And that's what you've got to look for. Real content with not a big following, but an influential following.
Right.
And that just starts to mushroom. I got a call from a woman, and I actually did a podcast episode on it, who had been listening to me and reading the stuff in Cyber Protection Magazine. And she's just a realtor in San Diego.
Okay.
And but she's trying to make ends meet, and she got a job offer to essentially do payroll. And it turned out she was being scammed. It was somebody who wanted to have her launder money. But because of what she had listened to on the podcast and what she had read in the magazine, she called me up and said, "Am I being scammed?" And before she accepted anything, she said, "Am I being?" And I said, "Absolutely." And I was able to explain the whole thing to her. But that gave me so much joy.
Right.
That a person who isn't in the business was
had influence
enough.
On that.
Yeah, and it changed something. And she's out there telling other people about it. That's what we need to do to succeed.
Right.
100%.
Right.
And if you can't do it, then you need to hire somebody to help you do it.
Yeah, no, we see a lot of companies. They ask us, by the way, also, when they're joining our platform, well, what kind of content do the cybersecurity influencers like? I'm just going by what I see people sharing. I say really a mix. They like to share things that are highly technical because they're talking to other highly technical people, but they also really like to share like the kind of everyday kind of tip or, layman's articles as well. They also want to get that message out, So, those are two different audiences maybe, but, everyone needs to be educated at their own level. And so if you're able to educate the CTO and then the CEO who knows nothing about anything, and then the payroll person, like that is, in my mind, a good mix of communication.
Yeah,
people.
And when you're trying to sell a product to a company, you got to remember you're not selling to the CISO. The CISO may understand it, but he's not going to sign the check. The CFO is going to sign the check, and he's going to want to know.
He's going to want to know it works too.
What's the upside?
Right.
So you got to be able to have all of that messaging.
Yeah.
Yeah. It is, and I think that's like you're saying, where the marketing really needs to come and see themselves as part of the team, supporting the mission all around. And that's kind of one of my things that I'm big on is like when marketers can understand cybersecurity for themselves personally, they'll understand better how to communicate even for the companies that they're, marketing for as well. And see that, we're a team. We're all on the same team.
And, another audience that these companies need to be focusing on, and we were talking about this earlier before this show started, they really need to focus on legislators. Because legislators are
they need to understand before they make the rules.
Possibly more ignorant than my mother-in-law.
Right.
Because at least my mother-in-law, she is the sweetest, most wonderful person, most trusting person, and she gets these emails from people, and at least she's gotten to the point where she said, "Should I send them money?" "No, Mom. No, don't send them money." Yeah, but at
she's
least
aware.
She's aware. But I listen to these guys, not just in the U.S. federal system, but state and local people. Even people, I know people in our city council who work for Facebook, and they don't know this stuff. That scares me. That's part of the problem that social media companies have is they really don't understand security. They're just, well, we've got to make money. And the thing is, if you don't get yourself secure, you're going to start losing money dramatically. So they need to specifically have people with they need lobbyists not to get their way through, but to teach these legislators what this stuff actually does and how bad it is.
Right. You can form the committees even of the highest experts in the world, but they still have to, though those experts need to be able to bring it down to the level, you know, for the actual members of Congress before they go around, you know, just, you know, making up laws that sound really good, but they haven't understood the flip side of it.
Yeah.
You know, because it's easy to have a knee-jerk reaction. Something must be done. This sounds like a good thing, but, you know, we know from all the, you know, history, sometimes when you're trying to solve a global problem, you know, global organized crime, terrorism, gun running, whatever it is you're trying to solve, if you don't really understand what you're trying to solve, you can make it much worse.
Yeah, you know, this whole thing about
you can enable the bad guys.
Even, yeah, there's this whole thing about banning paying ransom to ransomware. Okay,
right.
On the surface, on a gut level, that sounds like a good idea.
Right.
But whenever you put a prohibition on anything, it just drives the process underground.
And
so
just be careful.
And you know, how do you incentivize someone to not pay the ransom? Because if what they've done is
you have to be able to provide solutions that are really tempting, and that they're going to feel confident in, so that they don't feel they have to negotiate with criminals.
Yeah.
So and until you have those in place, banning it doesn't make sense.
Well, and here's the other problem. Okay, we've got 2 laws in the world, and 3 if you want to include the New York legislature. You've got the California Consumer Protection Act, CCPA, and the GDPR in Europe. If a ransomware hacker steals your material and says and encrypts it, and they say, okay, if you don't pay the ransom, we're not going to return this to you. And if you say, well, no, we're not going to pay the ransom, you do the strong thing. Well, then say, well, then we'll just make your data public. Okay, and they can do that even if they do allow you to decrypt it. Well, if you have a fine for paying ransomware, if that fine is not bigger than the fine that the European Union is going to level on you for allowing customer data to be leaked, okay, the cost benefit analysis is, well, we're just going to pay the ransom and pay the fine for that, because it'll be cheaper than violating the GDPR.
Right.
And
how do you structure a fine for you? There's such a range of companies.
Yeah.
You know, mom and pop place cannot be fined the same way, you know, as Big Eye. And you can make a tier and all of that, but it gets very muddy very fast.
Yeah, and the GDPR doesn't look at whether you're a mom and pop organization or a multinational corporation. The fine is the same for the number of people that get their data leaked.
It's leaked, right?
Yeah. So that's my problem with. You know, I think, like I said, it sounds like a good idea at the surface, but it's not well thought through. There needs to be.
It could even be a good idea if it's well thought through.
Yeah.
But you can't put the cart before the horse. That's always a risky business.
Yeah. But,
make it food on.
But that's why it's important to actually have these protections put in place to get people to use them. Because again, if you just do the basics of cybersecurity, you don't even have to buy anything. Just get yourself a good password manager. Don't use your mother's birthday for your code. Just do basic stuff. You're going to make it tougher for a criminal to hack you, and that takes you out of the low-hanging fruit level.
Right.
So that's why we have to get this information out.
Make them work for their money. Gosh darn it.
Yeah, and they don't want to.
Yes,
right now.
Cyber criminals are
usually
lazy.
Looking for an easy buck. Yeah.
Right. That's so true. Well, we've gone over time, so Lou,
okay.
I want to let you get on with your day too. But really, really great conversation. Loved your insights. Thank you so much for joining us. And we're really excited. We hope we can have you again for another conversation in the future.
Yeah, sure. Just throw me a subject and I'll talk on anything.
No, it sounds like we just started to peel back the
I know. I hate to cut it off, but
hello.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Have a great day.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.